Let's get you more on calls for the deployment of the military to the northern areas of Gqeberha in the Eastern Cape. Bring in dear member of the Provincial Legislature, also the party's Northern Areas Constituency leader, Yusuf Cassim. Good to have you on SABC News this evening, Yusuf. I'll talk about the call for the Army's deployment in the northern areas in a moment, but let's start with just a sense of how bad the gangsterism problem is in these areas.
Tembekile, the communities in which we live in have run-in gun battles on almost a daily basis, and innocent bystanders are often caught in the crossfire. And if you look at the murder rate in Nelson Mandela Bay, we are the murder capital in the country. And a lot of those murders, a large proportion of them are gang murders taking place in the northern areas, but also other gang-affected areas in Nelson Mandela Bay.
And are you able to give us a profile then, Yusuf, of the gangs, how many gangs are operating in the area, for instance? You've given us an extent of how bad the violence itself is, but what exactly are they fighting over? Is it territory? Is it the issue of extortion, etc., which I know has also affected, for example, people trying to hold funerals in parts of the Eastern Cape, etc., in recent months?
Tembekile, we've mapped out all of the gangs and their territories. We work very closely with community leaders across all of our areas. There's a number of gangs that are at play, and the conflicts that can arise for a number of different reasons. It's very similar to the situation that plays itself out in the Western Cape. In fact, many of the gangs that now operate in our areas find their origins in the Western Cape. And it has become so pervasive now that, you get small children that are killed in their homes. And that's what really precipitated a lot of the action that has taken place from the community. About 2 years ago, in 2024, April, 3-year-old Emilio Hutchinson was gunned down in his home just because he was a relative of a witness that was going to appear in a case around a gang killing that had taken place. And from then, and we had been fighting this issue for years, but from then we had, there was a huge march in Nelson Mandela Bay that led from Helen Vale past Emilio's house to the Gelvandale Police Station. And there was a petition that was then taken through the different processes of Parliament. I presented to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee of Police, and thereafter, the Portfolio Committee of Police of Parliament tabled a report in the National Assembly, and that report was adopted. And that report had certain recommendations that had to be implemented by the Minister of Police, which included increasing the capacity of the anti-gang unit, which only has 7 operational vehicles for its over 180 visible police in AGU members, increasing the capacity of crime intelligence, which is necessary to really take apart these criminal networks and dismantle them, and to increase the support given to law enforcement agencies. I can confirm, Tembekile, that none of those recommendations have been implemented, and therefore part of our calls today was not only about military deployment, but was also to demand that the President has his minister implement the decisions taken by Parliament, which he hasn't done as of yet.
And on the military issue then, why do you think the presence of the SANDF will help to turn things around in these gang-affected areas in Gqeberha, when you consider that ultimately it will still be the SAPS that has a duty to lead in these operations? So the role of the military will, for all intents and purposes, be more to assist.
So when you have SAP's capacity so severely crippled, I'll give you an example just to really paint a picture in the minds of your viewers. The flying squad in Nelson Mandela Bay is really the limping squad, because it has no operational high-performance vehicles. And when myself and the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee of Police, MP Ian Cameron, visited the flying squad in November last year, we found only 1 operational bakkie, which has since become inoperational. So SAP's capacity has been crippled to such an extent that communities are taking the law into their own hands, and community neighborhood watchers and patrollers are now having to really take on the responsibility at the expense of their own lives to try and safeguard their corners of their communities. So we don't believe, Thembekile, that this deployment would solve the issue. Of course, it's not going to solve the issue, but it would stabilize the issue, and we'll take it over more graves and tiny graves for our children in our communities, which has become the norm in recent times.
I want to roll two questions into one then, Yusuf, because we're almost out of time. Are you heartened, are you at all encouraged by the fact that the Premier of the Eastern Cape, Oscar Mabuyane, has now also, according to some reports, said that he intends to write to President Ramaphosa to ask for soldiers to be deployed to the northern parts of Gqeberha, and B, on that report that you referenced around the need to capacitate the SAPS, why has that been sitting gathering dust when, as you say, the bloodshed is continuing?
It's a leadership problem, Thembekile, and we have a role as members of the Legislature and members of Parliament in our oversight role to ensure that the executive does their job and that we increase the pressure when they are not doing their job. I cannot answer as to why the Minister hasn't implemented the decisions of Parliament, but what we have demanded is that the President forces him to implement them. That was part of our memorandum. And of course, we are heartened by, we welcome Premier Oscar Mabuyane's endorsement of our call for the military to also be deployed to our areas. Of course, we've been raising this issue in the Legislature with the Premier and with the MEC on a continuous basis. I'm sure they're sick of me raising it every single week in the Legislature. However, I will ask the Premier to also ensure that the decisions of Parliament, that he also applies pressure to the leadership ranks of his political party that are in charge of this portfolio in the GNU government, to ensure that those do not fall by the wayside. We're not going to solve this problem through military deployment alone. The military can assist to ensure that we deal with the illegal firearms, substances, and the gun battles that are running constantly in our communities. But once they leave, we know from experience that it just goes back to square one, and therefore we need a whole of government approach. We need SAPs to be properly capacitated, but also the best way to stop a bullet is with a job, with a skill. And we have been fighting for skill centers, for school of skills for the northern areas. There's a number of interventions that we've been fighting for beyond law enforcement interventions, and one needs to have a whole of government approach, not just a deployment of the military and thinking that's a silver bullet, in order to make a meaningful difference in the fight against gangsterism and criminality.
Yusuf Cassim, thank you so much. Yusuf is a DA member of the Provincial Legislature in the Eastern Cape, also the party's Northern Areas constituency, speaking to us about their call, a demonstration they held today to urge the President to deploy soldiers to the northern parts of Gqeberha.